evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
Welcome back to another episode of Mahoning Drive-In Radio, and thank you for joining us for a special Canon Corner edition with Austin Trunick, author of the 2 volumes of the Canon Film Guide, Volume 1 covering 1980 to 1984, Volume 2 covering 1985 to 1987, and Volume 3 on the way as we speak. Today we're going to talk about Penitentiary 3 from 1987, which is screening on 35 millimeter on Friday, August 12th as part of our AGFA Triple Ripper triple feature. First film will be Double Agent 73, second film, The Gate 2, third film, Penitentiary 3. So Austin, thank you for joining us again, and fill me in on Penitentiary 3 because I've actually never seen it.
So Penitentiary 3 is the third movie, as you might have guessed, in the Penitentiary series, starring Leon Isaac Kennedy and directed by Jamaa Fanaka. It is... I will say that you probably don't need to have seen any of the previous Penitentiary movies to enjoy Penitentiary 3 to its fullest capacity. You just need to know that Leon Isaac Kennedy plays a boxer named Martin Too Sweet Gordon, who really keeps being dragged back into the boxing ring, mostly in prison. They keep finding new reasons for him to box in prison. The first movie, a very quick plot recap, is Martin is out. He basically defends the honor of this prostitute that is being harassed by a couple bikers and gets in a fight with them and accidentally kills one. And when he is sent to prison, he basically becomes caught up in this boxing ring where he basically would become somebody's slave. I don't know what the proper term for a prison relationship is, unless he can box his way up to the top. If he wins this, that won't happen. So it's already a much higher stakes boxing match than anything Rocky ever went through. In the second one, the main bad guy from the first movie, breaks out of prison and murders his girlfriend. He has a character named Half Dead, and he's actually played by Ernie Hudson from the Ghostbusters fame. And Mr. T makes a very early appearance in Penitentiary 2. He plays the trainer of Leon Isaac Kennedy, his character, Too Sweet, to get him back in a boxing shape because he had, of course, sworn off boxing, but now he has to avenge his girlfriend's death. Penitentiary 3, Too Sweet's boxing again. Somebody evil slips angel dust into his Gatorade bottle on the sideline, and he accidentally murders someone in the ring when he's on this sort of like drug-fueled craze. This sends him back in prison, which gets him back into another prison-run underground boxing tournament. And to catch you up to speed, that gets you to Penitentiary 3. They're wild. They are... Penitentiary, the first one, is a pretty gritty prison film with some pretty good boxing sequences. It gets a little crazier, a little more far-fetched with the second one, with Ernie Hudson and Mr. T joining it, and it starts to stretch the limits of what you might think is realistic. The third one, everything flies out the window. This is a prison that is run by a gangster played by Anthony Geary from General Hospital, a daytime Emmy winner, one half of the Luke and Laura phenomena. If you were ever sick home from school in the 80s or even the 90s and happened to watch General Hospital, you would know this.
That was somebody... a phenomenon for a few years. He was also, was it Laszlo in UHF? I think a lot of people know him from.
Yeah. So cult movie fans, if you didn't recognize him from General Hospital or from, your grocery store checkout aisle, like magazines right above the conveyor belts.
Soap Opera Digest, yeah.
Yeah, more people I know would know him from, UHF. He also did Disorderlies at this time, which was with the Fat Boys, the movie, and this movie, Penitentiary 3, where he plays the very colorful prison boss who runs not only a drug ring, but a prison boxing tournament. And yeah, Anthony Geary, I guess, had, from what I've found, was just kind of wanting to get away from soaps, kind of sick of the whole Luke and Laura phenomenon, and tried to find roles right at this time to kind of separate himself, distance himself from that character. And And you would say UHF, Penitentiary 3, and Disorderlies are three very non daytime soap roles.
When I saw UHF, it took a while to realize that that's who that was, because he was, I mean, not that I watched General Hospital as a kid at that age, but you could not escape that guy's face.
No.
And suddenly to see him as this weird hermit guy in UHF was just crazy. And then later, I mean, much later, discovering that he did Penitentiary 3 and seeing the way he looks in this movie, it's just, he certainly got away from the Luke image.
Right. And yeah, Penitentiary 3 is some of the other crazy elements that are in it, beyond Anthony Geary running this ring, is a character that most people if they've seen Penitentiary 3, they'll associate with this, is a character called the Midnight Thud. He is played by a wrestler named Raymond Kessler, who wrestled professionally as the Haiti Kid, and that's actually how he is credited on screen in Penitentiary 3. He is a little person, very muscular though, very, very ripped ex-wrestler, but he plays a character named the Midnight Thud, who is kind of like the Gimp from Pulp Fiction, I think. He is kept in solitary confinement. And when anybody betrays or makes Anthony Geary's character, Serengeti, upset, he unleashes the Midnight Thud on them, who is not only just this ruthless fighter, but from what we gather in the movie very quickly, also has like quite a few supernatural powers. A friend of mine, Sam Panico, who runs BNS About Movies, described him as a crack-smoking Jedi Knight. And that's very accurate. I think that's maybe the best description for this character. I won't spoil anything more than that, because this movie is really, really kind of nutty, and the way the action unfolds is just insane. But there are some incredible fights in here. It's much closer to like your WWF like style wrestling than boxing, I think. I'm not a referee in a boxing ring, but I don't think a lot of the moves that they do in these movies are illegal. Maybe in prison boxing though. But we also have Danny Trejo. Danny Trejo has a very small early role in here. Again, Danny Trejo, who has, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of movie credits now, but I think like 4 of his like first 6 movies were canon films, which...
He in Runaway Train.
He is. That was actually his first role. Runaway Train. He was in Penitentiary 3, which we're discussing. He was in Death Wish 4. He continues the tradition of Death Wish villains going on to bigger and better things, following Jeff Goldblum, Lawrence Fishburne, and Alex Winter in the first 3 Death Wish movies.
I just picked up a DVD from Umbrella Entertainment Australia of Death Wish 4 and 5 as a double feature.
Oh, that's such a good disc.
Because we had talked in a previous Canon Corner about Death Wish 3 and the Death Wish series and all that. So I was like hungry to sort of finish it off. So I'm really itchy to see those. Yeah,
they're you're gonna enjoy them. So Penitentiary 3, much like other canon sequels, they had a habit of making sequels to movies that they had nothing to do with originally. If you think of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Superman 4, Death Wish 2, Exterminator 2, just this a very consistent that they would sniff around for sequel rights to movies that they felt that they could probably squeeze some extra cash out of, and the original producers weren't really holding on too tight to. The original Penitentiary had been a humongous hit when it was originally released in the late 70s. It was an independent film. It was shot for $600,000, I believe, was the budget, and it brought in $30 million in the US. And a lot of that's thanks to its star, Leon Isaac Kennedy, really getting out there and pounding the pavement for, it was released by the first one was released by the Jerry Gross organization. And he went city to city, really promoting it on the radio, making appearances at theaters when it opened. He really wanted to become a movie star. Leon Isaac Kennedy is actually somebody who really interests me. His backstory: as a kid, he grew up in Cleveland. He went to the same high school that Paul Newman had graduated from, I believe, of course, years before him. But he had always wanted to get into showbiz. He kind of looked up to, he was like, oh, if Paul Newman could do it, I can do it too. You know? So by the age of 16, he had actually had a radio show first in Cleveland, but then became nationally syndicated. He was a nationally syndicated DJ under the name Leon the Lover, the 16-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah. By the age of 18, he is actually starring in 2 TV variety shows, one called Teen-A-Rama, I think out of Washington, and another one called Out of Sight. And Out of Sight, he starred on, he was a host, he produced, he wrote, he played all these different capacities. 18 years old. It was actually syndicated a few months before Soul Train hit national syndication. So he had the distinction of, at 18 years old, having the first African-American variety series to be nationally syndicated, which is really an incredible achievement. I mean, I was renting, these movies on VHS at home as a kid. I wasn't doing anything that exciting at 18 years old. But yeah, in the 70s, he spun some of that success to use that money. He opened a chain of discos, and he also worked in various capacities on different blaxploitation movies, either having small roles in them or writing or producing. But it wasn't until Penitentiary that he finally broke into movies, which is what he wanted to do, and really became a star. And yeah, because he was so invested in trying to be one of the biggest guys in Hollywood, he really wanted to do this. He went out and he worked really hard to promote it. And yeah, $30 million on a $600,000 budget. That is a fantastic take for a independent film.
That's amazing, because as a youth, I remember, the Penitentiary movies being a thing, but I didn't really know what they were. I remember Leon Isaac Kennedy being mentioned a lot in print. And I remember when his version of Body and Soul came out, and when that was on, when it premiered on like the cable channels and things. And I was like, who is this guy? Because he was being talked about like he should be a big deal, but I hadn't seen him in anything. And to know how much he had achieved before he was even in a feature role in a movie that's really amazing.
He's got quite a story. And yeah, you mentioned Body and Soul. That was a Cannon film. That was the first movie that he made with Cannon. But, he kind of worked on a couple other movies. He made Lone Wolf McQuade with Chuck Norris, and he and Chuck were trying to get a movie made at Cannon that was in the same vein. Actually, a script by Sheldon Lettich called Strikers Force that would have had Chuck and Leon teaming up. Sheldon Lettich wrote Bloodsport and a Rambo movie. But it never happened. And then finally, Cannon, by about 1986 said, you want to make another Penitentiary movie for us? How about that? And it happened really quick. Cannon it had the same director. Leon was co-writing it again, starring in it. But again, it was a sequel to a movie that was almost, the first one was almost 10 years old at that point. But, it had been, I think, more than 6 years at that point since any Penitentiary movie had been in theaters, and when Cannon continued it. He was also more famous, I think, too, because he also had a very famous wife at the time. He was married to Jane Kennedy, who was a famous model, actress, and as well as a sports commentator. She was everywhere. She hosted a lot. I remember from my youth, she hosted a lot of TV programming. She was in movies. She was guest starred on TV shows. I knew who she was far more than I knew he was until I started really digging into, the world of cult cinema. Yeah, she was really very much kind of a trailblazer, pioneer. She was, I believe, the first Black woman maybe even the first woman to be an NFL commentator, like to comment on NFL games. But yeah, the two of them were definitely, especially in the early 80s, I guess what you'd call a power couple. Both very famous for different reasons, but also very famous together as a pair. Actually, I'm very eager to hear anybody who makes it out that weekend and sees the movie. Penitentiary is a movie that has not had a very kind home video history. There was a VHS tape, of course. Cannon put it out back, I think, in '88. It was almost immediately after the theatrical release. They ran the tape out, and it's now, you can find it on YouTube. It's never had a Blu-ray release. It's all just a rip of the VHS tape, and this is a movie with a lot of fog. A lot of fog. There are just fog machines running in this prison, and whether that's the crack that the Midnight Thud is constantly smoking in his jail cell, or just like it's just a very misty, foggy prison. But that's very much a very heavy choice that the filmmakers or the production designers made for this film. So there are scenes where on those transfers, it is hard to see what's going on. So this is a movie I've always wanted to see on 35 or see in a theater, because I know it's going to look better.
Yeah.
There are people who are going to be seeing this movie with you guys and actually seeing, just from it being on film, seeing much more of the movie than a higher percentage of the movie than they'd ever seen through all of the thick smog and crappy VHS transfers. That
I always say, even if it's a movie you've seen 100 times on video at home, seeing it on the big screen is like seeing it for the first time. And in this case, you might literally be able to see certain things for the first time. The prints, as far as I know, is coming from the AGFA vault, and they're much like Exhumed Films. Their library is extensive and deep, and they're bringing these prints for all 3 films up from Texas for that weekend, and they're providing trailers, AGFA style trailers between. So it should be like an amazing retro grindhouse at the drive-in experience. And speaking of grindhouse, the number of times I've looked at old photos of 42nd Street in New York in its heyday, and the word penitentiary was on one of the marquees. I presume that obviously this movie had a theatrical 35 millimeter release. Do you know how wide a release it was? Because clearly these movies did very well on 42nd Street, but I don't know if they worked their way out everywhere in the country, or if it was regional, or if it was more down to like socioeconomic, ethnic demographics, or what it was.
Well, yeah, this was one that Canon released with a regional rollout, just a limited number of prints. They'd send them one city, move them along. And they really did it in a slow and kind of I feel like they botched it. They opened it first in kind of weird markets. And rather than the markets where the first 2, especially the first one, had been a hit, you look at the box office, and the first one had done really well at 42nd Street. Out in Los Angeles, it had been a huge hit, and Detroit had been a massive, massive success. It played in Detroit for the longest time, and it was already on VHS, really, by the time Canon rolled out the prints to those cities. It was playing in random places in Texas and Florida and Kansas and things like that before it got to the markets where it could really kind of build a big word of mouth. Because like I said earlier, the tape, I think, came out right at the beginning of 1988, and I think it didn't get its Los Angeles premiere until mid 1988, and the theatrical premiere date was September of 87. So they really took their time, and I don't think Canon put too much logic into where this movie would be opening and when.
So any commercial home video copy you could possibly own of Penitentiary 3 would date back to 1988. Do you know if there were ever, like, sometimes the Canon films would get a re-release on video a few years later, like under MGM or somebody else, but is it really only that initial VHS release in the US that came out?
There is a DVD release. I don't think it's a US. I think it's an import or maybe a bootleg or something. MGM never did a official DVD release of it. Yeah, no, I'm thinking of the cover of the DVD version. It is like a very poor, probably a VHS transfer, and it's regional. So if you see the regional in there, it's probably a bootleg. Right. based on the quality. But yeah, so distribution has not been kind to this one, and that's why when I saw you guys that AGFA was taking, I'm like, oh, if AGFA's got a good print, then if the rights are somebody, yeah, if it looks half decent, oh please, if anybody at any labels, do whatever you can to.
It does feel like it would be a good contender for Vinegar Syndrome, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It does. It really. They put out the first 2 actually, so
they did. Okay.
Every time I see I know Vinegar Syndrome likes to tease like what's coming up, and there'll be like a catalog, like a new catalog box set. I keep praying that, like, oh, please be like Penitentiary 3 plus a re-release of the first 2 discs in a new set. I know they've done, I think, similar to what they did with the Dolomite movies not too long ago. But yeah, even AGFA, like, I'm a huge fan of their horror show disc that came out last year with just the horror trailers edited together, and it's just how many hours once you include all the extras is one of those releases that has brought me so much joy over these last 2 years.
There will be one official AGFA, what do you want to call it? AGFA emissary representative on site that night. So I kind of hope they're going to be vending too. I don't know yet, but somebody from Austin is coming up with 6 or so film cans, presumably not as carry-on. The plane wouldn't leave the ground with that much weight, but they're going to bring literally straight from the AGFA vault. We'll be seeing it on our screen, and I'm like super excited because Double Agent 73 is just madness. And to see that on a big screen is that's one film where what's on screen will be very clearly visible from the Walmart that's like a mile away on the hill. If people don't know, side note, if you go to the Walmart in Lehighton, you go to the far like right-hand corner, you could actually clearly see our screen and our lot and the radio station. The signal does stretch that far. And I'm not trying to get anybody to go and sneak up there and watch movies for free with binoculars, but let's just say the contents of what occurs in Double Agent 73 probably won't need binoculars to be understandable on the screen from that far away. And then The Gate 2, we have actually run before, and it's an interesting, weird, creepy little movie. And then Penitentiary 3, it's like, I always had the theory about drive-ins that you should sit through all of the let's say in quotes lesser titles to get to the really good one. Like you should earn your way up to that good movie. And for me, the one I've never seen and I'm most excited about is Penitentiary 3, and it is last. So it's going to be quite a night at the old drive-in. That's
really going to be an awesome way to see Penitentiary 3 if you haven't, because again, what's available to you at home is pretty bleak in terms of quality. So
well, that's like, speaking of semi-canon related stuff or canon related stuff. No, it was canon. Well, the Punisher movie. I recall the Dolph Lundgren Punisher on VHS when it came out. There's this whole sequence where it's bathed in red light, and on VHS it was just this smeary, murky mess. You could barely see what was going on, at least the copy that I saw at the time. And then when it came out on DVD and Blu-ray later, it's like, oh wow, I can see all the details in this shot now. So I'm not one who says that VHS is just the most horrible way to watch anything. It was fine when we had it. If the copy was good, it was fine. It's just, it pales in comparison to what we have now, but certainly a bad transfer. So those early transfers, some night scenes, some foggy scenes, they did not fare well as far as visual comprehensibility came. So yeah, who knows what condition this print's going to be in. Some prints retain their color really well. Some fade and get a little pink or a little red. You don't really know until you look at it on the bench and throw it up there on the screen. So at any rate, the whole aesthetic they're going for is an old style grindhouse triple feature. And in those days, they called them grindhouses because the projectors just grinded on and on and on, and the prints picked up little nicks and dings and splices here and there. So I think if the prints are less than pristine on that night, nobody's really going to complain. But we always do kind of hope for them to be perfect so you can turn your mind back to maybe it's like opening weekend. But speaking of home video, this has got nothing to do with what we've been talking about up to now. Your personal opinion, best Blu-ray or home video release of Death Wish 2? Gosh,
well, that Vinegar Syndrome 4K that just came out, does that count?
Oh, anything, because I had the version that Umbrella had put out that was Death Wish. I think it was just Death Wish 2, but you had like multiple versions and all these extras, and I haven't seen the Vinegar Syndrome set. So I'm just curious on your opinion on which has the upper hand.
Yeah, that Vinegar Syndrome set looks incredible. They've put out a couple canon movies now at this point with Alien from LA and Schizoid. They have looked fantastic. I never assumed that Death Wish 2 could ever look this like clean and pristine as it does on there, but it does. One of the things that disc has going for it that is cool is the TV version, which features some different footage and actually some scenes you don't see in the theatrical cut. So that's really fun. Personally, in my collection, I picked that up, and I still have the Shout Factory release that's out of print now, just because they have some extras that don't overlap, and I'm very much geeky about trying to hold on to all of the canon interviews and things I have on different discs. But yeah, I saw the new one that Vinegar Syndrome did, the 4K new scan and restoration, and it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And the TV version is really cool to have.
Now, did the Shout Factory have multiple versions or just the movie and extras?
The Shout Factory actually does have multiple versions. It does not have the TV version. It has a version that is not on the Vinegar Syndrome version, and it is just a very slightly, it's not as drastic a difference as the TV version versus the theatrical one.
I want to say the Umbrella, did the Umbrella have the Greek VHS release? Or is that not a thing anymore?
I am actually not sure what is on the Umbrella one. So the only release I have is the 4 and 5, because it's the best way to get 4 on any sort of home video format nowadays is their release.
It's one of those movies that always, and again, this hasn't been what we were talking about to now, but since I have you, I remember for a long time in the days of VHS tape trading online and stuff, for some reason Greek VHS. Greek VHS would be where you got these unique versions of movies, or movies would be more uncut or something like that. And I had the Umbrella release from Australia, and I think I wound up giving it away or loaning it to somebody. So I haven't looked at it in a long time, but I kind of have the feeling that there was more than one version, like it was a 2-disc set. And it's, they always say, the Greek VHS, it's going to look kind of like a smeary copy of a copy, but it has these even more gratuitous moments that Michael Winner insisted upon in it. And it's just wild that there are so many versions. Now, the TV, again, not what we've been talking about up to now. The TV version it's just things that were cut out for the theatrical that they put back in to make up for the footage they had to cut out content-wise.
Basically, yeah. And I'm looking now at the Umbrella. I just had to pull up the website. But yeah, they have the TV cut and the Greek VHS cut and the theatrical cut on there. So if you've got that one, I guess you would be upgrading just for some of the extras and the 4K, because that's actually got the probably most interesting cuts on it already if you've got the Umbrella release.
It's fascinating. I love that we live at a time where you can have access to all this, and it isn't internet sleuthery and illicit trades and deals online and things like that. You can legitimately, with your head held high, say, give me every frame of Death Wish 2, and somebody will say, well, here's 3 releases for you. Really cool. No, really, honestly, I love that we live in a time that this stuff is so easily accessible, and the quality is as good as possible on these things.
And just the work that's put into restoring something like Death Wish 2 or Alien from LA or Tough Guys Don't Dance, for that matter. It's just, gosh, I really, really admire anybody who works in film restoration and preservation, because they're doing some very important work. And I'm not saying that I mean that in all seriousness, because a lot of these, especially when it comes to exploitation films, they are, you have these prints out there that exist, but unless they're really cared for, every time you play it, it's getting a little bit, in theory, getting a little bit worse, getting a little bit more worn.
And even though it's perhaps viewed by some as disreputable history, it is still part of film history. It's part of the history of our culture, because even though films are works of fiction, unless it was shot entirely in the studio with really weird costumes, it reflects the time that it was made, how people acted, how people talked, what people wore, what kind of phones they used. I mean, I find myself watching old movies now, especially in our 4K and Blu-ray HD era, and I'm looking at signage. Like every time somebody's on a city street, I'm like, I don't care about the actor, what's behind them? Because that's reality of the time that is gone. And there are movies of certain eras. I say to Val here, we'll watch a movie that was like set in the 70s or an era that I'm a fan of, let's say, and I'll say, if this movie was shot now, I would hate it. But all the trappings of the era that I'm able to see, thanks to this dumb movie about surfers robbing a bank or something, is excellent. Like, this is such a time capsule. So
yeah,
again, not what we came here to talk about.
No, but
I loved it.
Yeah, high definition can definitely make backgrounds distracting. I had an experience. I was watching Times Square, the 1980 the movie with Tim Curry and Trini Alvarado, and oh my gosh, like it's one that I'd probably only seen on VHS a long time ago, but watching it on Blu-ray, and how much of it is just shot in, like I said, on Times Square, like around 42nd Street. The movie probably took me an extra like half hour to watch, because I kept pausing it to read the movie screen marquees and like just see what all these grindhouses, like you mentioned earlier with Penitentiary, what was playing at these places. And then you could like just read the prices on the menus and all of the like deli counters that they walk past. And yeah, the signage is definitely, I understand completely, because I'm very easily distracted by, wait, how much did an egg sandwich cost in like 1979 when they filmed this? I need to know. I need to stop it right now too.
We were watching this Arrow box set. I believe it's called Years of Lead, and it's a really good compilation or compendium of Italian crime films from the 70s. And there's this idle shot of a car driving down some like rural Italian road somewhere. They pass a billboard, and I pause it, and I'm like, that's a sign for a drive-in. And Val speaks Italian, and she read it, and it was a drive-in that was playing Mel Brooks' silent movie. And it was just and again, it wasn't intended to necessarily be part of the movie other than to illustrate that they were driving down a road. But now it's like, oh, wow, that movie played at an Italian drive-in in this year that this film was made. And that's what an Italian drive-in marquee looked like. The stuff that was never intended to be interesting or part of the story is this whole other level. And again, it's in HD. On VHS, the detail wouldn't have been there. or on DVD, even the detail probably wouldn't have been there quite as much. So
No.
yes, thank you to all who restore films, especially the disreputable ones or the ones that have fallen through the cracks over the years, because honestly, to me, that's the more interesting films. The classics are great. They're always going to be great and wonderful, but those are really, they're always going to be around. The Gone with the Wind and Dirty Dancing and who knows what, Grease, they're not in danger. But movies like Penitentiary 3, we're talking right now, it hasn't had a video release in, let's say, approaching 40 years. And who knows how many prints are out there. I presume that Canon in their vaults has the negatives. You presume that, but you never quite know.
Especially when it comes to Canon movies. They were not a company known to spend money on renting storage space or building additional storage space. So I know at least like deleted scenes, things that were left on the cutting room floor were usually just swept into trash cans at the end of the day. And I can't imagine they kept a very large archive of their prints afterwards.
They probably didn't foresee multiple video formats either. Like I could totally see a company saying, well, we transferred it. We've got a video master. VHS is where it's at, and that's where it'll live for the rest of its life. And why do we need these film prints? That would be unfortunate if that was the case.
Yeah, it's especially Penitentiary 3. I can't imagine that is one that all that many prints existed in the first place, just because of the way it was released in such a staggered kind of here and there style.
So Penitentiary 3, once again, screening on 35 millimeter as part of the AGFA Triple Ripper show at the Mahoning Drive-In on Friday, August 12th. Austin Trunick, thank you once again. Your books are the Canon Film Guide Volume 1. Not that you don't know. I'm telling everybody else. Canon Film Guide Volume 1, 1980-1984, Canon Film Guide Volume 2, 1985 to 1987, and the Canon Film Guide Volume 3 coming soon wherever finer books are sold. Austin, thank you so much. And thank you for listening. Until next time, I will see you at the drive-in.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night and God bless you.